right. Hey, folks, John Kelly. Welcome back to the Law Enforcement Life Coach Sometimes Heroes Need Help podcast. I am sitting down with Kristofer Healey. And I got to tell you, man, I had the pleasure and honor of being on his show, the host of the Indispensable Man podcast. And he's doing some great things in retirement. And I hate even saying retirement, man, because you're probably busier now than you were back then. Former DHS agent, all sorts of investigations that really took him to countries all around the world. So, case agent on some pretty big operations, fighting cartels and corruption. He just really was that guy, right? An extreme athlete, triathlete. We just got done talking. Like when you go for a run and you do 2 miles and you pat yourself on the back, this guy's doing 140 miles. Okay. So let's get things in perspective. Listen, I could go on and on and on talking to you about Kristofer Healey and the man that he was and the man that he is. But I'm going to shut up now and we're going to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Kristofer Healey. Man, it's great to see you again.
I gotta have you come around to be my hype team everywhere I go.
Oh, listen, you got an event you need me to introduce? I'm there, brother. I'm there.
It's like the Michael Buffer treatment coming in. I love it. So,
too funny, man.
Yeah, I came out of over 15 years with Department of Homeland Security. I started out with ICE and then went over to DHS OIG about 3 years in. And that's for those of you who are not federal or maybe don't know. OIG is the Office of Inspector General, and so we basically do the internal affairs for the entire Department of Homeland Security. But it's not just internal affairs. It's not just people doing bad things. It's not just employees doing bad things. It's also program fraud. So if you think about, in Florida, for instance, a hurricane hits and the government comes in and just throws money at the problem. Oh. I was part of that crew that would come in and investigate all of that fraud because that's all DHS money, or CARES Act fraud or things like that. Or what you mentioned before was, kind of my big part of my career spent doing international fraud rings, mostly India-based telefraud, individuals who are calling people in the United States and impersonating the federal government. And
listen, a lot of people need to thank you for that, man, because I still get the call.
Oh, yeah.
Or the text message saying, there's a problem, you need to call.
My team led the largest takedown in U.S. history of one of those telefraud networks, and it took us about 8 years to bring those guys to justice. But we traveled all over the world. Brought one of them home from Singapore.
56 people, 300 million.
Yeah, 300 million we know about. I mean, there's probably a lot more than that.
Yeah. Oh my, yeah, and indicted over 56 people, $300 million. Money laundering and wire fraud.
Yeah.
That's that's protecting people on a whole different level.
Yeah, that became a passion for me. It's weird. Like when I joined DHS because of the events of 9/11. I graduated college in 2001. I had an anthropology degree. I was actually working archaeology. I was in the field. I intended to go on, get my PhD, be a professor. That was the career path I had. I was working on a field excavation in down east Maine. So you're a New England guy.
Sure.
Machias, Maine, way down east by the Canadian border. No cell towers, nothing. So I was probably the last guy on the East Coast to even know we had been attacked because I had no communication. I was cut off.
Sure.
And that really impacted and affected me. I said, I want to be like one of those guys who was responding that day. I want to be one of those guys who's going to be a part of making sure this never happens again. And so almost immediately I started reaching out to the only federal agency that anybody knows, which is the FBI, and started asking, "Are you guys hiring? Are you guys hiring?" And they said, "Not unless you speak Urdu, Pashtun,
yeah, right.
Arabic,
yeah.
Or
we
you
can
some
fast track you right now if you have.
Right, yeah, we're hiring if you're
language.
That guy."
Yeah.
And I was like, I took high school French. Does that help?
Yeah.
And they said, no, not at all. But of course, we know that the federal government went into a big hiring freeze after 9/11. That's when they were figuring out how to make us more effective. You can argue whether or not they did, but they stood up the Department of Homeland Security in 2003. And that's when I started the application process, got on board. I got sent down to Texas. And so I never thought, when I was applying, thinking I'm going to fight terrorism, or I'm going to be the guy who's like arresting the people in this country, like all those like Saudi nationals who
Sure.
did this attack. I'm thinking I'm going to be the guy going after them. I never would have imagined that the pinnacle of my career would have been really elder fraud, but that's what it ended up being. And so the people that I was investigating, these India-based telefraud organizations. They're running out of call centers, mostly in Ahmedabad, India. Those guys were preying on American seniors. I had tons of victims in Florida, tons and tons of victims there. The
Right, right.
average age of my victim was 73 years old. And
Yeah,
these people, these are the people who have a more trusting relationship with the voice on the other end of the phone.
of course. They grew up in a different era.
Grew up in a different era. They're less cynical than those of us who
Hmm.
maybe are Gen Xers. And so, they pick up the phone and somebody says, this is the federal government and, you need to send us money because your social security number has been compromised. You've got to vacate your bank account and send it to this federal agent. And we're going to give you an address and take this cash and send it. Those sort of scams tend to work on that generation, the baby boomer
Sure.
generation. And so that really kind of became almost by accident. I was the duty agent, and my boss brought me some stuff that had just come in off the hotline. He said, "Hey, you interested in kicking the tires on this? It looks like we may have a DHS employee." At the time, we thought it was a Citizenship and Immigration Service employee who had been calling H-1B visa holders in the Houston area and impersonating ICE. He was threatening these people with deportation if they didn't pay. And we thought, this has to be local. This guy has to have a list of local H-1B visa holders. We're probably going to get the video back from the stores where these gift cards were vacated. We're going to see some guy buying a TV or something. We'll go arrest him. What ended up kind of, we scratched the surface on this massive scope fraud investigation. And what we found was it was almost exclusively Indian nationals who were in this country on like student visas that were vacating the funds. And it was this massive Hawala network, this money laundering network that was funding all sorts of different criminality. And we chased these guys all over the country, all over the world, flew to Singapore, did the first extradition from Singapore under the UN Treaty Against Organized Crime. So brought this guy all the way back. He's doing 20 years now. So I had some fun experiences, but I never would have thought.
Outsource, right?
Operation outsource. Yeah,
man.
Never would have thought that in my career when I signed on that dotted line and stood up and took the oath and everything, what I expected I'd be doing and what I ended up really specializing in were very different things.
That's
so you
can
never know.
Can I tell you, like, I would never, like, I didn't care about dope. Dopers, listen, you take one doper to jail, there's going to be another one. But what I did, my thing was when I worked a patrol dog, I'd hide in a ghillie suit in the bushes all day to catch a burglar, a thief, somebody that takes from a hard-working just the concept, the balls of you to go into somebody's house or to take something that's not yours. Oh, well, we're coming for you, and we're gonna put a hurt on you, and that, like, what a vulnerable community. Elderly, just nice people. They don't know. They don't want to get in trouble with the government. And so, they were probably just in droves, just, honey, we got to go to the bank. We got to go, he's giving us instructions, and they get all confused and upset.
And it's very threatening tone. I mean, if you've
locked those people up, man. Yeah.
We put some of them away for over 20 years. Some of them, or I should say 20 years. I think that was the max sentence for some of these guys were 20 years, but they were, the sentencing ran concurrent. So they could have, the judge could have put an even bigger hurt on him if he had decided to add the 5 years on top of it. But so we had a lot of domestic guys that we were actually able to reach out and touch and put cuffs on. We were only able to arrest and extradite one from overseas. There's still over 30 of these guys that I indicted that are breathing free air in India. The other side of that is that they have to stay in India for the rest of their lives, because if they stick their head up somewhere else, they're
popping up on a radar and they get snatched.
We've got red notices on all these guys. What we don't have is a ton of cooperation from the government of India. And there's mechanisms to do that, but that's well above my pay grade.
Yeah, and listen, it's at this point, Kristofer, it's karma, man. They'll get theirs, man. It's just a matter of time.
It's true. And those guys, I mean, to me, what really drove me was the passion of working with an individual who had no hope that they were going to get any justice, right? Most people think, like, you get scammed by someone on the phone, you bring it to your local PD, there's not much they can do about it. They jurisdictionally, you're crossing multiple jurisdictions.
We kind of throw our hands up and go, well, we'll take the report, but the hell do we do with it from here?
So bringing those reports up to, there's different databases. The FBI maintains a database. The FTC maintains a database. So a lot of departments they'll upload those reports, and they'll have the basic information. And my team we got very adept at crawling those databases and looking for those reports, calling victims, calling local PDs, getting all of that information that we could, and then aggressively pursuing and trying to fit it into the network that we were looking at. And what we found was there were basically about, at the time, this was 2013 to 2020, there were about a half dozen call centers that were operating in concert with one another. It was almost as if McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King were all, price fixing and working together and sharing secret sauce and stuff. And they were using a network of what we deem runners, basically money mules here in the US, to vacate the proceeds of this crime. And so individuals are either being forced to send boxes of cash, or they were going to buy gift cards, like those green dot cards, and then those cards were being vacated and placed with money orders being placed in various bank accounts. And so we kind of got aggressive about pursuing victims, finding victims, and going out and reaching out and touching them.
Because I can imagine a lot of them, once they've realized they got scammed, they were embarrassed.
Very much so. And they're embarrassed because they don't want their children to find out. If you're talking about somebody who's lost, their entire life savings, and now, they're a widower, and they don't want to tell their children that I'm about to be destitute. I had a lady in Florida who lost over $200,000. She lost everything.
Insane.
I mean, she was about to take out a second mortgage on her house. You're in Volusia? Is that nearby?
I'm in Flagler, which is northern Florida, East Coast. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we worked with a county in your area to actually go out and
next door.
We went and got in front of her. We said, listen, guys, can you send a uniform out there and get in front of this lady before she sends anything else? And so, being aggressive as a investigator, a lot of times we think of the job as we investigate what happens, right? We're never going to make a victim whole because we're getting the reports after they've already become a victim. But we found that if we could get aggressive, and if we could work with locals, if we could develop a good network of contacts, and we could get in front of this, if we worked a lot with like asset protection people from Walmart and different grocery stores where they were buying money orders that they were then placing in third-party bank accounts.
Hey, when you see an old lady come in here and ask for $20,000 in Apple gift cards, like, stop her. Don't let her do that. Right.
Yeah. And we got pretty effective at that. And several major retailers, including Target and Best Buy, made adjustments to how they to the kind of red flags in the system, when we started talking to them about this and saying, listen, your products are being used for this. Now, your products are being used for perfectly legitimate reasons, but they're also being used for this. So can you help us by developing some red flags? And oh, by the way, like, can we dispense with we have to subpoena you for every one of these CCTV images? I mean, can we work out a system where
streamline that process?
Streamline that. And so we worked a lot to do that as well. That made us more aggressive. It made us more effective, and it allowed us, by the end, before I left, we were able to intercept some of these packages. If we got victim reports quick enough, we were able to actually set up stings and catch the guys. Like, what they were doing is they were having elderly folks ship a box full of money to a CVS or a Walgreens, and then they were going in with fake IDs and picking up these packages. And what we found was, if we could get victims, we had enough of a lead time where we could set up an operation where we could actually stop that guy as he's coming out of the store with a box of cash in hand. So we got pretty darn good at it. And beyond Operation Outsource, we put another 15 or 20 guys in jail, kind of in little one-off cases around the country. So we got good and effective at it, but it takes a lot of education, and it takes a lot of, recognition that just because you're taking this report from this person who's walking in, don't think that it won't be seen or go anywhere. Put all the information that you can into that, and educating the local agencies on who you should be referring that to, and how to sell your case. Because really what it comes down to, a lot of law enforcement is very similar to sales. It's, you're selling your case to prosecutors. You're selling maybe a case that needs to go federal. You're selling it to the feds. Maybe you're selling somebody on taking a plea deal. This is the best deal you're going to get. So there's a lot of salesmanship to it. And we realized that had to be an effective part of our response to this problem.
Wow. That sounds like, you can do a lot of things in law enforcement and not impact anybody, believe it or not. People think that everybody's touching lives and making a difference, but it sounds like that your team and that operation really did some good for all the shit that federal agencies end up catching from local and state guys. It sounds like that you guys were really dialed in, really making a difference, trying to protect a whole class of people that was kind
Nobody
of just
cares.
no, just like
This
right.
is the thing. This is what
Yeah, it's
bothers
not
me.
sexy. It's not,
No.
you know,
And I didn't want to get famous off this. What bothered me about it was, I worked on a DEA task force for a while, right? And everybody,
yeah,
like you said, dope coming across the border,
right.
like they're throwing away 10 kilos. It's no big deal, whatever. Like we find that stuff abandoned.
Yes.
But the thing is, like with a DEA task force, all the local agencies want to be on the task force because they can do what they call a DAG. They can seize items. They can
Everybody
seize
gets a piece of the
cars.
pie.
Everybody gets a piece of it, right? And it's a
Right.
self-funding agency. So the
Yeah.
more money and dope you seize, the more cars and assets and exotic pets and houses that you
Christmas. Christmas comes early for a lot of
Absolutely.
places. Yeah.
For us, what we were doing, one, we had no task force to rely on. We had to kind of create our own task force. We literally referred to ourselves as the 6 guys who gave a shit. That was like our task force name.
That's
And,
awesome.
and
We got to get a patch. We got to make a patch of that.
we
Oh
really
my
should have, but
God.
we really didn't have a lot of support.
That's
We had a little bit
awesome.
of support from from because there was a money laundering aspect to it that could have impacted. It didn't necessarily, but it could have impacted drug financing or terror financing. There was
Sure.
some federal kind of task force OCDF assets were allowed, but the reality was we were never going to be seizing a large amount of money because the money was going into a network and it was going to 15 different bank accounts, and and the amount of time and effort to track it from victim all the way out before it got spent was just a non-starter. So
Right.
we approached it from the idea of we're always going to get more justice than restitution. And that was a hard sell because the federal government, they like to, just like a lot of agencies, they like to have that Photoshop or that photo
Sure.
of, here you saw it the other day with the guy
Yeah, of
up in
course. Yeah,
Philadelphia who got caught.
they cut the guy. Let's prop him up. Let's
Let's
go.
all have our selfie, right? So
Yeah,
they
man.
want that selfie. There wasn't really ever going to be that for us because even though it was a $300 million plus case, there was nothing to seize. There were no big
Hmm.
pooling bank account that we were going to get a hold of. It was going out and being spent and working its way back to India and matriculating to other places. And so we had to be content with selling it to a DOJ entity that was willing to accept justice, that was willing to say, okay, we're going to do this just because we're going to make a headshot on these call centers and we're going to make an example of them. And
Yeah.
we were very fortunate to meet with and sell it to prosecutors who were as passionate about it as we were, because
Yeah.
our victims, like you said, they're not loudmouths. They're not complaining about the stuff. They're elderly
No,
Americans
no.
who are by and large embarrassed that they've been victimized. And so we really had to champion them and become their voice.
That's awesome that you did that, man. It's just I think we get beat over the head with what's important. People tell us with what's important, and that certainly is, but it's something that you never even think that there'd be anybody investigating that.
Right.
It's just like something that happens. And that's awesome. So you wrap up a career really protecting quite a vulnerable population and doing a hell of a job at it. You and the 6 guys that give a shit. Um, you know, you have this transition. Like during this time, you're an extreme athlete.
Yeah, so that was kind of my outlet during all of
I
this.
was gonna say, right? Everybody
Ah,
needs something, man. So
that
talk to
was
me
it.
about that.
Yeah, so there's kind of a backstory there too. So,
Yeah.
so that big case, Operation Outsource, really started in 2013. That was when the IRS scam, and if you guys, you had a cell phone in 2013, you were getting these calls. So that's when the IRS scam really, they transitioned initially from, they were impersonating mostly CIS, and they were mostly looking at the H-1B visa holders in the country. So it was mostly Indian callers scamming Indian H-1B visa holders in the country.
Putting the screws to them saying, hey,
Yeah,
you're on our list to be deported next month.
exactly.
You need to do X, Y, and Z.
Exactly. And then they realized, the call centers realized that was almost like the test run. And then they realized, you know, why are we focused on this niche when everyone in America pays taxes? Let's switch what we're doing. Let's switch up the script. And that's when they started dialing for dollars.
Nobody wants to get in trouble with the IRS.
Absolutely not. People are terrified, right? And so during that time, I had in early 2013, I had blown the whistle in 2011 on my special agent in charge. I caught him in the act of, this is a really, you can look this up. It's ridiculous. This guy basically, we had he was relatively new as a special agent in charge, and we had, as they have in the federal agencies, we had an annual inspection. So we had a team that was coming down to our office that was going to
An
make
audit.
sure an audit, basically make sure all our bullets are counted. You know how it
All
goes.
that bullshit, right?
And so he was getting real nervous and freaked out about this because the guy was not. He was a terrible leader. Parsing words here, but he was a terrible leader, and
Yeah.
when he became the special agent in charge, he started assigning out way more casework than the agents in the office could handle. So we had stacks and stacks of any allegation, any BS allegation. We called them fanula news, first name unknown, last name unknown. So and so did something at such and
They
such
were
a place.
never going to be cleared.
Never going to be cleared.
No information to properly investigate.
Right. No meat on the bone. So these are the kind of cases that normally, we take the first bite of the apple at the OIG. There are smaller other agencies within the department that we could have referred those down to. We could have said, no, these don't rise to the level of a federal felony investigation. This is like some stolen sandwich caper from the Border Patrol station. I don't need this. Like we're not making a federal case here. He was opening all of them, hoarding them and stacking them up. And he realized when this audit was about to happen, that he was going to get slapped on the wrist really hard, and it might endanger his ability to maintain that command position. So he got together with a couple of other agents in the office who were really, really interested in promoting. And he got those guys to create a bunch of fake memorandums to stuff into these cases to make it look like progress was being made. I caught him doing it. And I was a young agent. I was like, less than a year out of the academy.
Right.
I was off probation, thank goodness, but I wasn't in a position where I felt really confident that
you weren't a senior guy in the office.
I didn't feel like I was super confident about blowing the whistle on the GS-15 special agent in charge, and and a couple of senior agents. The inspection team came down. They met with all of us, and morale was terrible in this office. The guy,
I imagine it would be.
It was a bad place to work, and I said, I was not an Army guy. I know you went to a military academy, so you understand honor codes probably better than most. But I called my dad. I said, I said, this is what I witnessed. This is what he's doing. What should I do? And he told me, he said, listen, at West Point, he didn't go to West Point, but he knows this. He's a fan of history. He said the oldest honor code in academia is the West Point honor code. It says, I will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. He said, so if you are allowing this, what's accepted becomes acceptable. If you're aware that these cases are being stuffed with fake memorandums, that there are potential things that could happen to the subject of those cases down the line that are based on these fake memorandums, you're saying that you're okay with that. Are you okay with that? And I said, absolutely not. He said, then you have to say something, even if it means that your career is down the toilet, even if it means you're blacklisted. So I did. I said something to the inspection team. I blew the whistle. My SAC ended up going to jail for 36 months, federal penitentiary. And so but that was from 2010 to about 2014. So
no stress during this time.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I'm I'm getting hell from like the top of the chain, the head of my agency. Like we had literally deputy assistant inspectors general, guys who were like SES level, like, $200K a year kind of, presidential appointee type people calling down to the office and kind of making threatening, notations
Healey?
about how.
Why do I keep hearing about Healey?
Why do I keep hearing this name? So it was not a great time for me, and so I that's when I got into endurance sports. I had run a marathon. I wasn't really into it, but I found myself under a ton of stress. I found myself really like waiting for that shoe to drop. When am I going to be target? Yeah, please do.
My daughter goes, I'm feeling really stressed and anxious. What should I do? She just said that before we sat down. I went,
go for a walk.
Exercise.
Yeah.
I go, we got a Peloton in the other room. Throw some shoes on and get after it. I go, that is my remedy for anything that life throws at you. Exercise, sweat.
That was it. And I became kind of addicted to that. I found that during that stressful period, it was a 4-year period where, I was testifying in federal court against my boss, against colleagues.
Yeah.
And I found myself saying, look, I'm part of the OIG. Like we're supposed to be a level above in terms of integrity and honesty. So if I can't stand up and say, hey, this is wrong.
How do you hold anybody else accountable?
How do I hold anyone else accountable?
Yeah, man.
So that's where the exercise really kicked off. I was always kind of a fit guy.
Listen, can I call bullshit? This is where the exercise. It's not exercise, bro. Please be a little more descriptive on the exercise.
Sure. So I started running. I started out as an endurance athlete doing half marathons and marathons. So 13 miles.
Which is basically a warm up.
Yeah, 13 miles or up to 26 miles, and then I ended up over the course of about 6 or 7 years. While I was investigating
Yeah,
Operation Outsource, while I was going through this, putting my boss in jail, during that same time, while I was involved in a shooting, and
of course.
so all those things are
You were
happening.
running a lot.
I was doing a lot, but I started doing Ironmans, and for those who don't know, that's a 140.6 mile race. It's all human powered, so you swim 2.4 miles, you ride your bike for 112 miles, and then you do a full
You
marathon
do
after
this
that.
over the course of a week, right?
You do this over the course of less than 17 hours.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah. So
Holy
it's a single
smokes.
day. Yeah, you have
Yeah, a
you have
single
cutoffs.
day.
You have
Oh,
cutoffs. Yeah, you have to on the swim. You have to do the swim in under like 2.5 hours. I typically average between about the fastest I did for the swim portion was 57 minutes, but I typically was closer to an hour and 10 minutes or
and
so
that's
to do that
nice. It's a
swim.
nice leisurely swim. You're not getting kicked in the face or,
Yeah,
almost drop. People aren't swimming over the back of
yeah.
you. And
There's a little of that.
oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
There's a great episode, which I got a kick out of. There's a great episode of Jocko Willink's podcast where he's talking to a Navy SEAL who he almost drowned in Afghanistan. He had to like swim across a river in Afghanistan. He got pulled under, weight of his gear on
Right.
this mission, all this stuff. And one of the ways that he overcame the trauma that he experienced in Afghanistan was when he got back and got out, he started doing Ironmans. And he told Jocko, he's like, it was exactly the same. He's like, I was getting beat up.
Yeah.
I couldn't come up for air. So the first one I did was Ironman Texas, in Houston. It was the hottest Ironman on record up until that
Of
point.
course it
Um,
was.
and
Right.
it had been nice and cool leading up to race day, but on like race day, it was like spring decided, like it decided to be Houston that day.
Oh,
And so we got out there and we're swimming, and it's a group start. They don't do that anymore for most of the races. They do it with like
because I think probably too many people are dying at the
people have
group
died.
start. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people
Let,
people
let's
people
let's
have heart
adjust.
attacks.
Let's
Yeah.
let's do a little assessment. All right.
So
Maybe there's a better way to start. Maybe shotgun start. Everybody's got
yeah,
different times.
it's like a rolling start now. So it's
Oh my
like, you
God.
get in, you cross the timing mat as you enter the water, and but it used to be you would line up. There's 2,000 people, and a
What could go
cannon goes
wrong?
off. A
Kristofer,
cannon
what could
goes
go
off, and you
wrong?
just you just go, and so
Oh
everybody's
man.
kind of that 2,000 people are trying to narrow into get as close to the buoys as they can to cut their time on the course. And so,
Oh my
yeah, you
God.
spend a lot of time gulping water and getting kicked and punched and beat up. Your
Oh my
goggles get
God.
knocked off. It's a mosh pit, and
Yeah, that's
yeah,
insane.
and that was what I did for fun.
So you did that. That was your way of reducing
That was
stress.
reducing stress. Yeah,
That,
if that gives you an idea of the pressure I
how
was under.
much pressure and stress you were going through
Yeah,
that was an escape.
it was. Yeah, that
Oh
was
my
that was
God.
that
That's
to me.
awesome.
So I did 6 of those in that time period. I coached a bunch of other people. That was probably something I was more proud of. Was my wife and I started. She started doing those too. Monkey
Okay.
see, monkey do. So
Yeah,
she was
man.
out there with me. And she's
Probably
4'10",
still
100 pounds,
hates you
soaking
for
wet.
that,
No,
probably.
she's built a whole career off of it, so
That's
it worked out well
awesome.
for her. But yeah, we did six of those, and then started doing ultra marathons too, which was a lot more fun for me. That was
Talk to me
racing.
about an ultra marathon.
So an ultra is anything over 26.2 miles. So it could
Okay.
be so that it could be anything. There are guys who do 100 milers. I've never done a 100 miler. I've done a 50K, or no, sorry, the longest race I ever did was 41 miles.
Wow.
41 miles. Yeah.
I,
And
I used to work a detail. Red Bull would put this race on, Kristofer. You have to know about it, where everybody starts off and there's a pace vehicle. And when the pace vehicle catches up to you, you're out of the race.
okay.
Are you familiar with this?
Is this a bike race?
No, it's a
No.
foot. It's and so this race, they have them all around the country.
Okay.
Red Bull, Red Bull. It's a Red Bull event,
Okay.
and so everybody's got the band, the GPS, and so basically you are running as hard as you can for as long as you can. And there are guys that take this thing out like 30, 40 miles. It's
That's
insane
crazy.
before the pace vehicle catches them, and then they're out. That's something that that's right up your alley, man. I mean,
I tell people I'm retired now, but I think
oh, okay.
I could see. I mean, parenting is really the is the
Oh,
triathlon I'm involved in now
yeah,
for the
man.
most part. I still run, I still work out. I just haven't competed nowadays. Like we'll go to we'll go to Disney and we'll do a half marathon at Disney for, for fun. But,
Right.
um, that's more our attitude now. But yeah, there was a time I would go out and do trail races,
Wow.
out in, the hill country in Texas. And, you
Sure.
come out of it, you're all carved up with sodal cactus cuts and
Oh
everything
my
else.
goodness.
But ultra marathon is a beautiful beating. It's a lot of fun. You're not really worried so much about the time. It's more about like finding your edge. That was always my interest. And what I found was that the adversity the obstacles always fueled opportunities for me down the road. And so, when I said my wife created a business, well, I was, 15 years later or 10 years later, whatever it was, I was able to walk away from a law enforcement career because our endurance racing hobby turned into a business that was able to sustain our entire family. And so, you know, finding that edge, finding that adversity has had major downstream impacts and effects in my life. Not only do I feel more prepared when things happen that are unexpected, not only am I more mentally prepared to pivot and do things that a lot of people would shy away from because I have those experiences in my memory bank.
Right.
It's open doors for us that we otherwise never would have been able to walk through.
That's amazing. And that's starting to explain and connect a lot of dots for me about you. Can I share with the listener about your family and
Yeah,
your girls?
absolutely.
So I just found this. So you're the kind of guy, you and your wife, you adopt two beautiful girls, but both special needs.
Yeah. Yeah, one is so our daughters, Mei Li and Liana, are both from China. So we adopted our youngest. She was about three and a half when we adopted her, and so we thought that she was deaf. We thought she had epilepsy. If anyone in your listening audience has ever gone through an international adoption, you have a file and you have doctor's notes and it's translated and you're getting the information they give you. And so what actually she had, she did have epilepsy, but she was not deaf. She actually had a very rare chromosome deletion syndrome, which presents itself very similar to autism.
Mhm.
So she's nonverbal. She stims very similar to like an autistic kid. So if you've been around children with autism, you see kind of they're sensory seekers a lot of the time. She's very much a sensory seeker.
Okay.
Um, and so we adopted her when she was 3.5. She was our first, and brought her home, and we immediately had a brand new challenge. And I think a lot of the things that we had done in our personal lives and our hobbies, what I had done professionally, had really prepared us for that. Because otherwise,
This wasn't something, Kristofer. This wasn't
yeah,
something that you didn't that you went into and then you all of a sudden found this out.
yeah, it
You
was.
you you you
We
knew
knew
this
we knew she had special needs. We didn't know
on day
the
one.
special need. Right,
On
right.
day one, brother.
On day one, yeah.
Yeah,
So
man.
we went in expecting one challenge, and we learned it was a very rare and different challenge, and so we
Right.
pivoted. Right. So like
Yeah.
the obstacle presented to us then became okay. Well then let's take this path
Becomes
and
an
do what we can.
opportunity.
It becomes an opportunity to parent a beautiful little girl who was never going to get the opportunities that she's going to have now. And so
Yeah.
we decided she needed, we didn't want her to be an only child. We wanted to adopt again. We went back to China in 2019, and this time, what was interesting about this is, if you had told us before we went to China that our child that we were adopting was autistic, that might have scared us. It might have been something that we said, "Oh,
Right.
I don't know if we're ready for that," right?
Right.
But after we adopted her and we parented her, we realized we were ready for so much more. We could do more. So
Not
we opened.
not challenging, but the Healy's got this.
We got it, right? And so we had our second trip to China. We said, look, there's a little girl over there. She has cerebral palsy. She's non-ambulatory. She's never walked. She's 6.5 years old. Doesn't speak a lick of English. That little girl needs a home. And we kept kind of, my wife and I, as we were going through the process of figuring out, what child to match with, my wife kept coming back to this file time and time again. We said, okay. And so a lot of people, international adoption is intimidating because it takes a long time. For us, it was every single day that we weren't working on the adoption was a day that our girls weren't going to have parents. And so we did everything that we could to make the process as quick as possible. That meant, overnighting things by FedEx to the US consulate in Guangzhou or to, the Chinese consulate in Houston. We did it. And we were able to go through what we call the paper pregnancy. We were able to go through the paper pregnancy for both our girls in under 9 months.
Wow.
And that is like record pace. And so
Sure.
we got to my second daughter in October of 2019. Now, if you know what was happening in China in 2019 that impacted the rest of the world shortly
Right.
thereafter, you realize how close we came to not getting her, because we were one of the last families to get out of China before they shut everything down for the pandemic,
Right.
and they still haven't reopened. So if we hadn't worked as hard as we did to
Mm.
get to our second daughter, she would probably still be sitting there
Still
in an
be there.
orphanage. Yeah.
Still be there.
And so we brought her home. She was 6.5. We got home October of 2019. We got her into kind of a homeschool hybrid. We started getting PT. We started getting her to Texas Children's Hospital and started getting all that stuff done, because she had never had any PT, never had any health care, never had anything. And then the world shuts down. And all of a sudden we are in the position of, we have a non-English speaking, non-ambulatory child that we now have to homeschool, and we have to figure all this stuff out and navigate all that. And we managed to navigate all that. We managed to get her to a point where we just went through a major surgery a couple of months ago. That's putting some donor bone, rebuilding her feet, basically.
Sure.
We got to the point where she walks around with a walker. She's caught up to her peer group from a.
Are you kidding me?
No, she's ambulatory. She's caught up to her peer group. She's one of the smartest little girls in her class. I tell her all the time. I say, listen, like when she gets bummed out about, I'm struggling with this or that, I'm like, girl, you didn't speak a word of English until you're 7 years old.
How blessed are you to be struggling? Like, look at where you've come, how far you've come.
She's an incredible little girl, and she's technically an ESL student, but her teachers, they barely detect an accent. So it's one of those things where it can sometimes be forgotten that she still has to process things. Something said to her in English, she might have to, in her head, work through some Mandarin before she comes out with an answer still.
Right.
But she really hit the ground running. And again, I think we prepared for international adoption, for the rigors of international adoption, for adopting special needs children, by being endurance athletes, by my law enforcement career, by my wife being an entrepreneur, building a business. All those things created adversity that we had to overcome, that allows us to accept our particular parenting journey with a much more open heart and we're much more positive, and we have a much more positive outlook about what could be a negative situation to a lot of parents. If your child is born and has special needs and you're terrified of that, that's understandable, completely understandable. We walked into it with eyes wide open, in large part because of the experiences we had that taught us adversity is a gift. Adversity is a teaching tool. Adversity is an opportunity.
That's not a bumper sticker, man. You're living that.
You're living it. Yeah. And we all face adversity. Like, I don't like to think that my wife and I are particularly, I didn't come from, an athletic family. I didn't come from a family that, I got very stoic about things. I just said, I want to build up some stoic armor. I want to build up the ability to shoulder a bigger burden. And the way to do that is to go test myself, is to go find that edge. And I didn't know that 4 or 5 years down the road, after I started my endurance racing career, that this was the family I was going to be bringing home, or any of that stuff. But there was always something in my head that said, push harder, find your edge, go one more. And that led to me being able to be the father that they need me to be.
Yeah, I am. I'm just so taken aback that this was, trying to change mindset, right? And get people to take action and to pivot, like we talk about, to see a situation, and maybe it's not ideal, but instead of wallowing in it or shying away from it, using it as an opportunity to be great.
Yeah.
And really and so you've got this beautiful family. You and your wife are team tackling it, and everybody's coming together. And so you've written a couple books. One out there available, one in the works, soon to be released. The Indispensable Man, a tactical plan for the modern man. Indispensable, a tactical plan for the modern man. And upcoming, In Valor, it's a 365 stoic meditation for first responders. And you're what I love about you, and listen, we don't have history, brother. We've we've made each other's acquaintance, but you're the guy that everybody feels like they've known for a long time because there's that thing, right? That thing about you, the way you carry yourself and the way you view things. Um, so you've taken these real world life lessons, these real world um, practices, and you've developed a program to help the rest of the men out there like be the best version of themselves. And so talk to me a little bit about that, man,
Yeah.
because I know I don't know a lot of people. I know there's a lot of people that purport to like this is what you need to do to be a man and come to my boot camp and we're going to roll around in the mud and we're going to do push-ups and there's going to be a lot of yelling and you know what I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely.
And you go,
Yeah.
okay, wait a minute. I'm a grown man.
Yeah.
I don't need another grown man yelling at me to motivate me. I don't need
Right.
that. But there's something that I'm missing because I'm not looking at life through the proper lens.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's what you do, man.
I think there's kind of two ends of what we'll call the manosphere, right? Like there's the in your face, like what you're describing, the come pay us $5,000 to come do this boot camp and
Listen,
we'll
if you
treat
want to
you.
do that, man, you should just join the
Join the
military.
military. I know, right?
For
Yeah,
free.
but let's say you're 45 years old and you never had that experience and you feel like you're missing something. I understand to some extent the appeal to that. I got that out of my system at law enforcement academy, right? I did enough push-ups and sit-ups,
Right.
red gun runs and all that stuff to know. So like I don't need that, but I understand the appeal to some degree. But you're coming out of that and you're feeling like, okay, I accomplished something, I proved something to myself, found my edge. And in a lot of ways, like it's the same thing as Ironman. It's the same thing as doing an ultra marathon.
Right.
It's you need to find something in yourself that you've never found before, and I get that appeal. And then I think the other end of that spectrum is there's kind of that like woo-woo, touchy-feely, like get in touch with your inner masculinity and your feminine side and all that stuff, and recognize the duality of man and all that, the Jungian stuff, and like. I think there's a happy medium where
There has to be.
There needs to be like, listen, guys, like you do have to work on the mindset stuff. I get
Right.
all that. You have to get your mind right, and there's things that you have to address and you have to deal with, and you do have to get off your ass, and you do have to push yourself to be greater than you are, because you're stuck in this comfort trap and you've got to move forward from that if you're going to accomplish anything. So what I tried to do with the first book was I said, listen, I'm not special. I didn't have any, I didn't have any like special upbringing that really put me in a position to accomplish the things I've accomplished in my life or to check those boxes. I said, I want to do that. And then I developed a plan to do it. And so for me, I wanted to give that basically what I call a tactical plan, that toolkit to other men who say, listen, I've always wanted to do something big. I just didn't know how to put one step in front of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the point of the first book. I wanted to write my story as just a regular guy who decided I wanted to do something to help my country. And this is how I did that. This is how I put those things in place. I wanted to find my edge, and this is how I did those things. I wanted to overcome these things. I wanted to make sure that I was a man of integrity, and this is how I did that. And so that is what the entire book is about. It tells a little bit of my story. It gives some background and stories and lessons that I picked up along the way, putting my boss in jail, running the largest telefraud case in U.S. history, racing 6 Ironmans, adopting 2 special needs children from overseas. All of those lessons that I learned and that I internalized allow me to be better at what I do on a daily basis. And so I tell those stories, and then I put together what I call the tactical plan, which gives guys some just concrete steps that they can take to actually start turning their strategic vision, their long-term goal, into an actionable plan. Because everybody knows we confuse the word strategy and tactics, right? In the tactical environment, like you talk about the tactical environment, that's a battlefield. That's the home you're doing the search warrant on. That is the tactical environment, the reality. And strategy is the long-term goal. What is the point of the search warrant I'm running? Why am I hitting this house today? It's because the strategic vision is this case is going to arrive at this point, right? So you have to be very in the present moment to make your tactics be effective. but you have to have some long-term vision for your overall strategy to be effective.
Right.
And so it's recognizing and separating those things and giving guys the steps to develop their values, their principles, recognize their strategic vision, and then develop the tactics necessary to get there. And the bottom line is all of this comes down to three things. It comes down to character traits, skills, and beliefs. Right? Your character traits are who you are. And I'm a huge fan and a huge advocate of Stoicism, Stoic philosophy, and the values that are described in Stoicism. Temperance, justice, wisdom, and courage are these core Stoic values that are character traits that are inherent in all of us, or can be inherent in all of us. So it's leaning in and recognizing and understanding, where do I need to build that platform? Where do these values and these character traits need to be in my life? Do I currently have them? If not, how do I gain more of them? It's recognizing that it's a lived philosophy that you can then apply. And then when we talk about skills, we all are born with zero skills. We all fell on our ass thousands of times trying to learn to walk or ride a bike or anything else.
No doubt.
Guys today, they think because we live in this, we have one of these things in our hands all the time, that we can order something from Amazon or order food to be delivered. We live in this drive-by society now.
Some people think that that's a skill.
Right, that's a skill, right? But that creates this comfort trap that we live in, and we don't actually develop or create skills. And so a lot of guys don't believe that they can do anything because they've never failed at anything, because everything has come so easy from the moment they've grown up with that that computer in their hand.
Right.
It's unreasonable to do everything well the first time you do it. But kids get out of college today and they want the $200,000 job or whatever. I got out of college, I had a $26,000 job with no benefits. That was my first job. So it's recognizing that skill development is essential, and identifying where are the skills that I'm lacking and what do I have to do to acquire them? Do I have to get a mentor? Do I have to get a life coach? Do I have to join a mastermind? Do I have to get into a men's group? What do I do to develop these skills?
Who do I surround myself with that adds value to my life?
And the last part is beliefs. It's understanding and overcoming those limiting beliefs that we put on ourselves. Like, I used to think I could never do an Ironman. I remember watching ABC's Wide World of Sports when I was a kid and seeing them every year do the Hawaii Ironman and thinking, how do people do? How does Dave Scott do that? Dave Scott, the 6-time Ironman champion. How does anybody do that? They must be superhuman. I remember swimming 500 meters for the first time in a lap pool and feeling like I was dying, and then realizing you have to go 2.4 miles to even start an Ironman. And what it was just changing that mindset to, listen, you don't get here overnight. You've talked about this. You don't F things up overnight, right?
Right.
You don't walk 10 miles into the woods and think that you don't have to walk 10 miles out. So it's recognizing that your mindset has to shift from instant gratification that we're programmed to believe exists in 2023 America to chopping away at it. It's going to take a long time to chop down the redwood. It's going to take a long time to eat the elephant. But every single day I do this, I'm better than the day before. So it's switching that mindset, the belief structure, to measuring the gain instead of the gap. It's measuring the gain from day to day instead of the gap between where you are and where you want to be. So those three things, character traits, skills, and beliefs, can get you anywhere. And that's what I try to talk about in the book.
Kristofer, I love that. I'll talk with some guys in a big brother capacity, and I'll say, you are giving way too much weight to the failure and not enough weight to the success.
Yeah.
Look, and we kind of do that. I mean, I think that keeps us stuck, that we don't acknowledge, and we don't celebrate the wins the way we need to. I love that whole philosophy, man. I think the other part of all that whole, failing, like you will never grow if you don't fail.
It's the great instructor, right? Like,
talk about that. Yeah.
Here's a great analogy, right? Like, if any of your listeners work for Customs and Border Protection, the guys down at the ports of entry where I was in South Texas, right? Brownsville, Laredo, McAllen. These are some of the busiest ports of entry in the country. Thousands of vehicles coming through a day, right? And a lot of those vehicles are loaded with dope, or they're loaded with aliens, or they're loaded with other dangerous things that they shouldn't be loaded with. If you've got a guy who runs a dog at the port of entry, or you've got a guy who just is an inspector at the port of entry, every single day he shows up to work, he's probably missing 85% of the dope that goes through his lane, just because he's got 2 minutes to clear that car. He's got 2 minutes to look for, to look for body language, to see if there's anything amiss, to recognize and understand what's going on there, and to decide whether or not to secondary it. And if he secondaries a bunch of cars every day and they don't hit dope on him, he's going to get talking to from his, from his people who are going to say, listen, man, you're messing with the traveling public, because we have a customer service mission as well as a security mission here.
Right.
So you got to be dead sure that what you're secondarying is going to hit. Well, if you're hitting, just like if you're batting 300 in the major leagues, you're an all-star. If you're batting 300 at the port of entry, you're an all-star. Now, the fact that 70% of the dope is getting through, does that make that guy a bad agent? Absolutely not.
Right.
Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. So it's the idea that you're going to fail an awful lot. Life is failure. We're failing we're dying from the minute we're born.
Yeah.
We're failing from the minute we're born. We're learning, but it's the great instructor. So it doesn't matter if you're failing. What matters is are you learning? Are you learning from the failure? Are you getting better from it? Did you screw up and then repeat the mistake, or did you screw up and then learn something from it? And that's why, the best hitters in major leagues, they're going to have a slump. They're going to go through, they're going to have their 5 strikeout game, but then they're going to come back the next game, and it's going to be that goldfish attitude, that short-term memory loss, and then right back in the batter box and go at it again. Those are the guys who ultimately are the most successful.
The combination of learning from failures and maybe redefining what failure is, an opportunity to get it right.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing I think that a lot of us that are stuck suffer from is that whole, somehow we think that inaction is going to give us feedback, wrongly, that somehow I'm just going to wait and see. And if I wait and see, then when we wait and see, we don't get any feedback. And it's
action provides clarity.
It's impossible to rework a plan or implement something different with no feedback. What's your talk? Yeah. What's your take on that, Kristofer?
Well, it sounds like small unit tactics to me, right? What's the first thing they teach us in a gunfight is get off the X.
Yeah, move.
And move. Close, like the Marines teach, close with and destroy, right? That's like their entire operating philosophy, right? So close with and destroy your enemy. Like you stay in one spot, you stay stuck. You're just receiving incoming. You are. That's a great way to get dead. Is to not move. But action perpetuates clarity, right? So moving in the direction, it may not be an A to B path. You may not be a
linear, right?
It may not be linear, right? And it probably isn't. There's a great quote by Marcus Aurelius, who was the emperor of Rome, kind of the philosopher king, the great philosopher king, right? And he's one of the last great Stoic philosophers. And he says, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. In other words, the obstacle is the opportunity that you need. You get blocked, pivot. Right? Like you're following somebody on surveillance and you hit a red light. Do you stay at that red light and just kind of twiddle your thumbs until it clears? Or do you go right and find another way to parallel them and catch back up with them? Right? Like action perpetuates clarity. So moving forward, even if it's not linear, it's still steps in that direction. You're still taking steps in that direction. You're still hacking away. You're still taking a bite of the elephant. And a lot of people will sit there and they'll stay stuck and they say, I want to someday. I want to someday. One thing that I've learned is that someday does not exist on any calendar. There is no someday on the calendar. You get X number of somedays in your life and you waste 99% of them. Well, you're waiting for the right opportunity, the greatest opportunity. We talk about this in having kids. Like how many people are out there saying like, it's not the right time yet to have kids. Man, it's never the right time to have kids.
Right. No doubt.
Kids are a bomb going off in your life, whatever you have. You can wait for the perfect time to have a kid and think that everything's going to be fine, and then something won't be. That's just life, right? So action perpetuates clarity, moving forward and doing the things that you want to do. And people have a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between action and motion. Motion isn't action, right? Motion is just kind of doing things and being the hamster on the wheel or on the treadmill or whatever. Action is actually taking concrete steps towards where you want to be, even if it's a small step. One thing I tell people is, when people ask me like, how did you do an Ironman? Well, the first thing I did was sign up. Before I even started training, I signed up for my first Ironman.
Wait, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah, man.
Yeah,
Now you're committed, aren't you?
you're committed. You're financially committed. Like an Ironman cost at the time, the first time they're more expensive now, $700-800 to sign up for one of those things.
Right.
I put a date on the calendar, July of 2012. Now I had done shorter distance races. I had done marathons.
Mm-hmm.
I was confident that I had the capability to rise to that level with enough training and time. But the race wasn't until May of 2013. I signed up 10 months before the race.
You
I
tell a lot of
financially
people. You tell
committed.
a lot of people about it.
You tell people about it.
Yeah, man.
You make them accountable for you.
This
You
is
say
what
this
I'm
is what I'm
doing
going
on
to.
this
Yeah.
day.
Yep. Yeah. And I talk about that in the book. I talk about like when we go into a tactical operation, right? We talk about assignments. Like everybody's got their assignments. So I'm the doorman, you're the, your perimeter, you're this, you're that, right? Like everybody has their assignment. Assign some other people to be your cheering squad.
Yeah, man.
Like
Yeah.
commit to what you're going to do and then announce it on social media. That's going to hold you accountable. Get some other people to be in your corner. They're going to help hold you accountable. But the first thing you're doing, that doesn't look like an action step, right? Because you're like, well, you didn't go for a run. You didn't go for a bike ride. Yeah, but I committed financially to this. And then I announced it to the world. And now I'm on the hook. And
Yeah, man.
that action perpetuates clarity.
Most certainly. And is that part of that becoming self-led?
Absolutely. 100%. Like I spent a lot of my career, you spend a lot of your career like waiting for somebody else to come and lead you. And what I learned early on in my career when I had a leader like the one that I put
How'd that
behind
work
bars,
out? How'd that work out for you,
is
pal?
that they're not always going to lead you in the right direction. You have to
Oh,
decide.
shit.
You have
Isn't
to be
that crazy?
self-led. Yeah, it is. And how many guys does that happen to? Like there is some, you can say, so there is something to be said about the old saying festina lente, which is make haste slowly. It means you're moving forward, but you're moving forward with some caution, right? That there's we're never in a hurry to rush to our death. So when we go into I had a Secret Service buddy who used to say that before every operation. We're never in a hurry to rush to our death. So we're going to go through the door. We're going to do a threshold check, right? Before we go through a door, I'm going to make sure my team's with me. I'm going to catch my breath. Boom, next room, right? Everybody's going to be on my heels and we're going right in. But we do those threshold checks. There is something to be said about festina lente, but what that doesn't mean is stop. It means get your wits about you. Check, make sure, carry on with the action. Right. So it's make haste slowly, fine, but slowly is still moving forward.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
So many people get that fear of action, and I'll tell you what, they say, I don't want to make a choice, right? Well, by not choosing, by not moving, you just made one.
Right. You deferred. And I've always found, especially in law enforcement, we're always waiting for the next sheriff, the next chief, the next the next sergeant, the next chief of the district.
Things will be different
he's going to turn it around, man. He's the guy.
Yeah.
And it's just trying to get the sheep to realize that, we like to think that we're not. But I was in it for 30 years, man. And everyone's hopes and dreams rested with an individual that they had no control over. And the person that they had, right? The person looking back in the mirror that could determine for them the quality of their career in life. They never lit the fuse, man. They never empowered that person to, to achieve and realize how awesome they could be. I worked for 7 different sheriffs, one no better than the other. Right. Good God, had I put like John Kelly's hopes and dreams in their hands, I cease to exist. It's a no-win situation, man.
We have, and a lot of cops feel exactly that, right? They think the next guy, the next sergeant, the next lieutenant. Here's the deal. The Stoics talk about this, and it's one of the truest things ever said. It's called the dichotomy of control, or dichotomy of choice, dichotomy of control. But there are things that we control and things that we do not, right? And so the things that we control, our thoughts, our actions, our reactions. We control very little else. But we worry so much more about the things we do not control instead of focusing on the things that we do. So we do not control the next political appointee to lead your agency. We do not control who gets the next promotion. We do not control whether we get, I never got promoted in my career, in large part because of what I chose to do. Yeah, like I put myself on the blacklist,
listen.
it wasn't going to happen. I knew that. That was a consequence of my actions. I understood when I
Right.
made those actions what likely would
Right.
occur.
Right.
Absolutely fine with that. That's good. I'm glad. I'm
Right.
happy because ultimately I had the career that I wanted because the things that I did in my career were a result of choices I made. I made
You
choices
answer
to
to
pursue
you.
a big case. I answered to me. I chose, I want to pursue this case and I want to put my all into it. I want to put my heart and soul into it. I'm not worried about pleasing the next person for the next promotion board because
Right.
I know choices I've made,
Right. Right.
put
Right.
my boss behind bars have X'd that out for me. So be self-led. Don't be afraid of don't be playing the political game and worrying about, what happens next. If I do this, then that. Worry about what you control, what you can do every single day. Live in the present tense as much as you can and recognize that every single day could be your last. Every single day you could leave life. It could end right now. So what are you doing right now to advance action? Or are you going to sit there and wait for it to come to you? Are you going
Yeah.
to sit there and then you walk out the door the next day and the bus hits you and you never did any of the things that
No.
you wanted to? Advance action, recognize you control your actions, your reactions, and your attitude. And more often than not, the things that upset us, when we get upset because a new sheriff came on board or a new manager came on board or whatever else, can we control that? No. So we're upset about so what's upsetting us is really our reaction to the event more than the event itself, right?
Right.
And once we recognize that, we control that, we can change that narrative. We say, okay, focus on what you do control. You control whether or not you work here. You don't have to stay at this department or this
Right.
agency. Punch your ticket out.
Right.
Work so hard that another agency wants you. Focus on what you do control instead of what you don't. But more often than not, guys, how many guys just sit around bitching about things they don't control all day, every day, instead of advancing action on things they do control? It's shameful, really, and it's endemic in this career.
I refer back to this daily. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's serenity prayer, man.
Yeah,
It's foundational. It's
it is.
foundational.
It's foundational, and it's foundational in Christian theology. It's foundational in Stoic philosophy.
Yes.
It's funny. 2,000 years ago, people had a pretty solid idea of how to live a life of meaning and value, and we seem to have lost some of that along the way. So referring to things like that, those philosophies and theologies of the past that are so dripping with wisdom. Everywhere I go, everywhere. We talked about you travel armed. Absolutely. I travel armed with Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. It's my favorite book. I've gotten more value out of that tiny little book. And what it was, for those who don't know, Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome. He wrote a journal every day. He journaled every day. And all it was, this is the most powerful man in the known world at the time, writing in his own journal about how to be a better leader, how to be a better man, how to live life with a better perspective, how to accept things, how to approach life better, how as death was approaching, as he's getting older and ill, he's talking about how to leave life the right way.
I think
All
I
of
might.
that was
I need to
you
grab
got a
that
copy.
book.
Yeah. It's
Gonna get
let's
a
see if I can
copy of
find
that
it.
book.
It's in the other room, but I was gonna hold
Yeah.
up a copy of it for you. But
What's
um
it's Marcus Aurelius
Marcus Aurelius Meditations, and
Meditations.
it was never intended to be published. That's the beautiful thing about this. It was never intended to be
It was
published.
his
It was
journal.
intended. It was his journal, and after he died, it ends up thank goodness it ends up being preserved and passed down through the generations. The best translation of it that I found is a guy named Gregory Hayes. He's the translation that I like the most. But there is so much wisdom in that, and think about it. The guy who this is, you talk about a sheriff having some power or a department head at DHS. This guy
The
was the
Roman
emperor,
emperor.
the
Of
Roman emperor.
right.
He could raise a legion to go spite his enemies any time he
Right.
wanted to, and he was worried about being a good father, being a good man, living life well, living life the way he should, being honorable, doing things the right way. And so find some guiding principles, find some philosophy you can live, whether that is, and I talk to a lot of guys on my podcast who have, I'm a Christian, guys who are Christ followers who have a very deep and abiding sense of who they are based on their theology. Wonderful. I get that. Not everybody is going to be in that sort of religious inclination. Some people are going to be more secular. Some people need to find that elsewhere. I would highly recommend for anybody Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. And that is why I wrote and am writing 365 Stoic Meditations for first responders. That's
Let's
why I'm
talk
writing
about that,
Valor.
man.
Yeah.
That's What do you
That's what we
think?
call it,
Maybe
transition.
you think they're about like 6 months out, you think?
Yeah, so we're recording this September what 14th.
Yeah.
I'd like to have this done in 60 days. So we're going to see each other in Orlando in
Yes.
November. I'd like to have a copy that I can hand you by then.
Oh my
So
Lord, that would be
yeah,
amazing.
so I'm
But
about halfway through. And now that kids are back in school, I'm able to knuckle down and type a little bit more.
okay, yeah.
Yeah. So what this book is it's 365 days of I take from mostly from the major Stoic philosophers. There's only about really they call the big four. There's only about four whose writings have survived 2,000 plus years. But there's a lot of
And who
lesser
are
known.
they?
So you're talking about Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and Musonius Rufus. Those are kind of
Okay.
the four big ones that people
Okay.
know. Um, and there's so much wisdom in their writing. There's so much that you can pull from. And so what I did was I took for every day of the year, I took a Stoic affirmation or just a piece of wisdom from mostly from those four, but also from guys like Zeno of Citium and just others, even some Eastern philosophers, even some other folks that have Stoic-ish advice to give, and I included
Okay.
all that in there. And then I write after that, I introduce the thought, I introduce the idea. I write 2 or 3 paragraphs, kind of almost like a blog post, kind of summarizing. I share a story that maybe relates to that quote. I talk about some incident from history that maybe has some relevance to that quote. And then I put a journal prompt down at the bottom, and that journal prompt is intended for the reader. And the whole book is intended for the reader to be able to say, listen, I'm about to go out on patrol. I need to get my mind right. So I'm going to flip to September 14th, and it's going to have a quote from Marcus Aurelius. It's going to have a little summary of what that quote is about. And it's going to have a journal prompt where I can say, related to that quote, am I doing X, Y, and Z? How
Yeah.
am I doing today? How am I feeling today? And it's going to give guys who maybe aren't inclined to have that self-reflection a really simple, direct, and easy way to reflect and to have that self-reflection so they can get their head right before they go out and face what they have to see during the day.
Another form of journaling is a history of you. And
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's for the reader. Like in this,
yeah,
if you want to know more about me, you can read my first book. This book, the second book, has nothing to do with me. It's 100% about, it's using examples of historical figures, of
to
incidents, of
help me
things that
reflect.
happen to help you reflect. Yeah,
Yeah,
to help the
man.
reader reflect. So I don't want anything to be about me in this book. I want it to be about the person who's receiving
Right.
the information and not about the person who wrote it. So I found so much value in my endurance racing career, in my law enforcement career, in my parenting career from those big four Stoic philosophers. And I find that some of the greatest leaders, General Mattis is carried Marcus Aurelius' meditations into battle with him. I mean, like some of the greatest leaders lean on these same individuals to
Right.
become more self-led, to become more virtuous in how they present themselves every day. So I loved it, and I felt like it was something that the law enforcement community could use. My friend Adam Davis wrote a book called Behind the Badge, 365. It's basically 365 prayers. So it's from a Christian perspective,
Sure.
and that's been a tremendous help for a lot of guys in law enforcement. It's been a bestseller, but I recognize that there's 800,000 cops out there, and not all of them have a Christian faith or feel
Sure.
deeply connected with their Christian faith. So I wanted to give them something that might give them some affirmation as well, without them feeling like they need to put themselves in one bucket or
In
another where their
align
faith
with
is concerned.
one specific religion
Yeah,
or not. Yeah, man,
yeah.
that makes perfect sense.
So it's inspired by Adam's work, and he's actually the guy who I'm working with to get that out to the masses. So that's
That's
another thing I
awesome.
would mention. If you're somebody who's interested in writing a book or wanting to write a book, there are guys out there who have walked that path before. Find one of them, find a mentor, find somebody who can offer you their time and services, and put that out there. Put something out there that's going to value other people, that's going to help other people, that's going to provide value to your fellow man, especially to your fellow law enforcement officers. You've had experiences that I guarantee you somebody else is going to benefit from hearing about, and it'd be a shame if those things never saw the light of day.
Kristofer, I was going to ask you to leave us with something profound, and I think you just did, man.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think you just did, man.
yeah, the
Um,
profound wisdom of life is. I think the most profound thing I can say is memento mori, and memento mori is, of course, Latin for "remember you will die."
yeah,
And every single day, I try to remember that I will die, and that this life is a gift, and that life, the only cause of death is being born, And so it's every day that we carry on, that we breathe, is a day to be grateful for, and we should remember that every single day. Whenever I get annoyed with my children, whenever I find myself being frustrated because I tucked them in and they want to get out of bed or whatever, I try to frame it around, remember, this will not last forever. Remember, you will die, and you will be
Yeah.
grateful for these moments. So be the dad that you can be today.
Oh
So
my God.
that's the best I can leave you with.
That's beautiful, man. That really is. Kristofer Healey, how do we get in touch with you before we part ways, my brother?
I've got a website, kristoferhealey.com, and you can find me on Instagram at team_Healey, Healey. That's got a link tree on my profile that they'll tell you where I'm speaking, how to get in touch with me. I do public speaking through the Team Never Quit Speakers Bureau, so if you're interested in having me come in and speak to your department or speak to your agency, you can go to Team Never Quit Speakers Bureau, and you can find my profile on there. You can book me through them. Great organization. I'm super excited to be a part of, and so yeah, that's how you get in touch with me. But would love to hear from some of y'all. Find me on Instagram. That's probably where I'm the most active, or find me at Team Never Quit.
That's awesome. And I'll put all your information in the show notes for our listeners. Ladies and gentlemen, Kristofer Healey, brother, thank you for the time, man. We talked about I get more out of this than the listener, man. I'm
Right.
blessed. I'm blessed to be in this position, and what an amazing opportunity to meet people like yourself. Thank you so much for your time today, brother.
Thanks for having me.